Hello and welcome to the final Up at Noon of 2016, a beautiful, disastrous year that we will hopefully cap off with something wonderful and positive. I'm your host, Brian Altano. With me, as always, Max Scoville.
Hello.
And in this final episode as producer, and first in a while as a co-host.
That's true.
Zach Ryan.
Here I am.
We've done a lot of great shows in this year. Hopefully you've been able to watch some of them. You can watch this show on YouTube. You can watch it on Twitch. You can also watch it on Facebook. It also streams on Roku and Xbox, PS4, all those other things. But this week we have a very special episode. Obviously we've been talking about Star Wars all year. It's been on our set all year. It's behind us now. It's in front of us. It's coursing through us all. Rogue One just came out. We've seen it multiple times over the weekend.
Not
all
me.
of us. What?
No, not once.
Get out of here.
I saw it
You were
twice.
supposed to do that was your whole homework.
times.
Good. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So we are going to do a very special episode of Up at Noon, specifically dedicated to Rogue One. Now, some homework for you. You have to have seen the movie to understand the show. Otherwise, you have to be okay with us being totally spoilerish about it. We're going to just bust the door open on this thing. Okay, we're going to just spoil everything in this film, top to bottom. We're going to have lower thirds that say spoilers. Hopefully they don't screw that up. And we just have spoilers everywhere. But we couldn't do the show without our good friends at Gillette, the best a man can get. They make Rogue One razors now, which you can buy. They have cool spacemen on the boxes. And you can actually see underneath, they shave.
Yeah.
You can't see it, but that's
You know how hard it is to get those helmets on there? If you got a big, thick beard that gets stuck in the microphone?
Yeah.
Imperial regulations state that you got to be clean shaven.
It's
under
true.
There,
You gotta do
unless
that.
you reach a certain rank, and then you can have a Fu Manchu.
Now, there are dozens of strange animal men in the Star Wars Rogue One that need a good shaving, such as Bistan, the monkey boy, and
Yeah.
that Piss Yeti.
Or, yeah, his name is Moroff. Where's my Moroff? I didn't bring my toy out to talk about him.
So let's get into it. Star Wars Rogue One, it's out now. It's got like a 84% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's pretty good.
Really good, yeah. I think people are sort of a little less enthused about it than they were Rogue One. But that's
Force
not
Awakens.
or Force Awakens is what I mean. But that's not to say that this is a bad movie by any stretch. I think all of us really, really liked it for a lot of reasons. There's some things to nitpick about. So let's get right into it. What did you guys think of the plot of Star Wars Rogue One?
Since day one, since they announced what the plot was, I haven't cared about the plot. Like, I love Star Wars. I love kind of seeing them explore different corners of it. But to be like, hey, this is them doing a thing that was mentioned in the opening crawl of the first movie is kind of an answer to a question I was never asking.
Right, and I also feel like when you go into a movie knowing the ending of it from the jump, it takes something away from it. Like, it's like, you know, going to see Titanic, I wonder what happens. And it's like,
the boat dies.
yeah.
They kill the boat.
You kind of know, or at least I felt like I knew going into Rogue One, that all those characters weren't going to make it.
Yeah.
Because how do you retcon those characters into the rest of the series?
Which I'm glad, I think a lot of people went in going like, two things could happen here. Either everyone dies, or they just pretend those guys live, but they never wanted to work again.
Or
you know?
they didn't become heroes of the
Yeah,
rebellion. Like,
yeah.
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, at the same time, the prequels were... I mean, the idea of the prequel sounded cool initially, being like, let's go back and see what Darth Vader was like as a kid. And there's that whole, you know, Patton Oswalt bit where it's like, oh, I love ice cream. Well, here, eat this bag of rock salt, the thing that's used to make ice cream. I mean, we're not huge fans of the prequels. A lot of people love them. But as far as taking the character Darth Vader and examining him, I think just that part of it could have been done more interestingly.
Right.
In this case,
to Patton's point, rock salt is delicious.
It is
right.
great. It's
Everyone
really
loves a good rock
Especially
salt.
on a hot
Most,
day.
most farm animals have an entire salt rock that they lick upon.
As a child, I remember the song playing from the rock salt truck coming down the street. So I think the prequels were redeemed, if only for the fact that Obi-Wan was explored as a younger version of himself, who I find tremendously fascinating. I still want new movies from him.
They also gave us the Clone Wars, which was like, that was another thing that was hinted at.
Yeah. And sometimes like you don't really need a good excuse to hang out, right?
Sure.
Like I feel like with Rogue One, I was the same way with you. I likened it to like making a movie about the guy that made Indiana Jones's whip.
Sure.
It's kind of like, well, he's got a cool whip, and I love it, but I don't really care how it was made. But once we started seeing shots of this movie, stills, we started reading rumors about it, we saw trailers and toys, and everything started coming together. Then I was like, okay, I'm cautiously optimistic about this one, and I think this is going to be, I mean, this is a Star Wars prequel that has like overwhelmingly positive reviews.
Well, I remember kind of going back and forth with the two of you guys as we saw more and more footage, and then we heard rumors about the reshoots, and then we saw more trailers. Like, each time there was this varying degree of, are we excited for this movie or not? You know, at first we were very excited about it because it was a Star Wars story, and then we kind of got a first glimpse, and it was like, well, maybe this isn't exactly what we had in mind, or we weren't super stoked for it. And I think we kind of ran the gamut of how excited we were for the movie leading up to those final couple of weeks when I think all three of us were on the same page. Like within the last couple of weeks, like, okay, I'm really excited to see this movie.
It's also nuts because this was announced ages ago. We got our first look at it at Celebration, wasn't it? And it was like, oh, the things before the Empire, the dark times, and we see like X-wings flying across Scarif, which we now know is the planet's name. But it's kind of weird because we've had Force Awakens, we went into that not knowing a damn thing about that.
Yeah.
The first sentence of the opening crawl of Force Awakens made us all go, oh, Luke Skywalker's missing. He's not in this. Like, we didn't know that. We didn't know that was going to be a thing. With Rogue One, we went into this being like, we know how this ends. Like, Force Awakens, we didn't know how it began. They basically gutted the entire canon, and they were like, hey, guess what? We are picking up where Return of the Jedi more or less leaves off, and continuing that story, telling the story of what happens next. The thing with prequels is no matter how weird and off-kilter you get with the kind of the deep cut stuff, it's still going to be retroactive continuity. It is still going to be revisiting something that already has a follow-up to it.
It's answering questions that have already been answered in many ways, and then giving new questions before them. Well, so I think that, like, all things considered, we did get this movie. We all watched it a bunch of times now, and given the fact that, like, okay, this is what they're making, how well did they put together this thing that they set out to do, which is basically telling the story about how the original team of rebels and mishap characters from all over the universe got together to steal the plans of the Death Star. How do you guys think they handled that well?
Yeah, I think so. And I think as the first foray into the cinematic expanded universe, I think it did a really great job of being very different, but also being very Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like, it does feel like a very different film. It does feel much more like a war movie. I feel like it feels more tangible than some of the other films.
Let's get right into the first, like, 2 minutes of this movie.
Sure.
Because this is one of the first things that, like, it is something I will get used to more and more as I continue to watch this movie for years and years to come, which I definitely will, because it has Star Wars on the box.
Right there on the box.
Right there on the box. But going from a long time ago to a galaxy far, far away to that stabbing noise to showing space, it's like a ring of Saturn, and then you see a ship flying underneath it, and it's Krennic's ship. There isn't a Star Wars logo, and a few minutes later you get that, like, Rogue One logo appears, and it's like thin and weird looking, and you hear that Jin's theme, I believe, and it's like dun 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 dun, and you're like, what is this?
Yeah,
like, it's off.
I think I know what they were going for there, which was basically trying to make a James Bond movie, where there's a cold open.
There's a cold open,
but the cold open was preceded by a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I would be totally fine if we didn't have this establishing shot of a ship landing on this mysterious planet, but more like just people talking, or like, I don't know, it's Krennic beating the crap out of somebody in a bathroom in black and white, and then it goes donut.
So
donut. I don't have to do that, but
I do want to exude as much positivity about this movie as possible, because I do think it was awesome in a lot of ways. But I do want to get some gripes out of the way. I think that what struck weird in this film was the amount of times they were like, we want to do fan service and we want to be true to the core of what Star Wars is, going head to head with the amount of times they threw that kind of stuff out the window.
Yeah,
like starting a movie with like a shot of a ship in space, like ambient and weird and dislocated, you're kind of like, oh, that's Star Wars. But doing it without the crawl or the other things, and we knew for a while there'd be no crawl, but it doesn't make it feel not a little bit weird.
Yeah, it's there's going to be some growing pains here. I mean, we're going to be getting a Star Wars movie at least once a year for the immediate foreseeable future. And if tracking what Disney's done with Marvel is any indication, there are going to be some missteps here and there. I wouldn't call Rogue One a misstep. I think they've definitely gotten it down to much more of a science. But like going back and watching the kind of early wave Marvel movies like Captain America: First Avenger or Thor, they were still kind of testing it out and getting it down to this known quantity. The fact that Star Wars does have a kind of existing format, it's Episode X, title name, opening crawl, long time ago, all that stuff, and then the camera spins off and you see whatever's happening. That's one of those things that they were going to have to kill sooner or later. I'm kind of glad they killed it now.
Yeah, you're right. They had to do it eventually, and this is the weird one that doesn't fit. Like this movie's kind of an orphan. Like, it doesn't fit with any of the other films.
But I think that it's important to note that it will fit. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it is an outlier right now, but like, as a kid that grew up reading the Expanded Universe books, like this to me feels like the the kickoff film in that series of films.
Which
right?
is
Like,
awesome, right? Because
yeah.
there's, I mean, the Star Wars or a Star Wars story means there's going to be several,
Right.
And the idea of that is incredibly exciting to me. Like Max and I are, and you're big on this too. We grew up on stuff like Tales from Jabba's Palace,
Yeah.
which is like taking a bunch of weird characters that we love and fleshing out their stories. And what this movie did was very different in that it gave you some more glimpses at some characters you enjoy, guys like Tarkin, guys like Vader, people like Leia. Spoilers. If you're not paying attention to that, spoilers.
We're
please, I
spoiling
beg
the
of
film.
you.
That's what we're
spoiling.
doing here. Run away if you're scared by this.
But it also gave us a bunch of new characters that I think are really, really fascinating and really interesting in a lot of ways in that they come together for different reasons, and I think some of them is the sort of selflessness that comes with being in part of the rebellion. Then you have someone like Jyn, who I think that like the way her character was portrayed on the film, she doesn't actually get a ton to chew on, or really much to do action-wise, but she does have a great story. The story of her father creating this deadly weapon, and then getting taken away from it, or taking himself away from it, and then kidnapped back to it, in which his wife dies, and then his daughter sort of seeks revenge. But the only way to do that is to pass on the one secret of how to take down this weapon, and that weapon ends up killing her.
Dude.
Is incredibly cool.
A lot like Han Solo, though, in the first couple Star Wars films, like I feel like she's not particularly invested in the rebellion until the very end. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they break her out of prison and they basically make a deal with her.
Which
right?
is
They
something
say-
that happens with Finn as well,
Right,
right?
yeah.
Like Finn has this sort of arc where he's like, I landed, I'm free, Rey's hot, I want to hang out with her, I'm not really into this anymore, I want to get out of this bar and get the hell out of here. And then all of a sudden he's like, I'm coming back. I love you guys.
I was going to say, I really liked Felicia Jones's performance as Jyn Erso. I think Jyn Erso is a fine character, but a pretty bland one.
Yeah.
Whereas Han is like, he immediately, you're like, who is this guy? What's his deal? When will he get his own story? But like with Jyn, she felt like a video game character
Yeah.
in that she was more of an avatar for people watching. Like you're supposed to see the movie kind of through her eyes.
Yeah.
We already know
that.
what Star Wars is as a universe, but like her motivations, there was no question there. They made sense, but like her conflict seemed much less kind of believable than some of the other people there. Like it was more like the people around her. Like I thought that Cassian was a much more interesting character. His whole deal was like, oh, being in the rebellion it's not good guy stuff all the time.
Right.
I really love that because I feel like Cassian exposed an element to the rebellion that we'd never seen before, that they are morally complex, that they are figuring it out as they go along.
Yeah.
It was
so
sort of
for
like,
me,
yeah.
that's the best part of this.
Yes,
for me, is
totally.
the way that they portrayed the rebellion, because I feel like in every other Star Wars film that we've seen up until now, the rebellion is painted very clearly like these are the good guys. Their actions are only heroic, and they're only acting with the fate of the people in mind.
Yeah.
Where right out of the gate, this dude kills a guy in cold blood.
Yeah.
Like he murders a guy that he supposedly works with.
Well, he kills two bad guys first, and
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, that's a little raw. And then he just kills another guy, and you're like, oh man, this is just like this guy is.
Well, and he has the whole speech about you're not the only one that's lost everything, and he
Right.
talks about how you have to break these rules in order to serve the greater good, which I don't know why I had never considered it, but it totally makes sense.
Well, of course.
What I like,
Yeah.
of course,
Is-
there's got to be some undercurrent of moral ambiguity to the rebellion.
Yep.
Yeah. So Saw Gerrera, I thought was a really interesting character. I thought his portrayal could have been a lot better. We'll get to that in a second. But the fact that they were like, there's kind of a sliding scale. That hating the Empire doesn't necessarily mean you're on the same side.
Right.
Yeah.
Like people like Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera are opposite ends of the spectrum. There is the Rebel Alliance, and then there's
there's
just
these
straight out
extremists.
rebelliousness. I mean, it's
Right.
kind of like with Anonymous, for instance. Like
Right.
you can say like, oh, I post on the internet, I do hacker stuff, I'm part of Anonymous, but how does that work? That doesn't really work like that,
Right, and then you have also people who are just like
Yeah.
taking it in the complete. Like,
Yeah,
you
and
have
then-
the same thing with like liberals who are like, I want equality and stuff like that.
Right.
And other people who are like, I'm kidnapping
No.
a doctor. And you're like,
Nothing
what
is
the
that simple.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and
Right.
they kind of go into that being like, Saw Gerrera, be our friend, and he's like, lies, deceptions,
Yeah.
great Scott, Marty.
Yeah, basically. And I think there was like something like I couldn't figure him out. I've seen the movie twice now, and I still don't really get exactly why the focus on his heavy breathing machines, his apparatuses. I think that like
So you shed some light on this to me
Right.
recently, because there's a write-up that you read about in the art book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that made a little more sense. What was it
well,
that
so
you said?
there's this sort of like thought that he might be exposed to kyber crystals, which end up
Yeah,
going
that's what it was.
into basically. So the whole point of the Empire being there is there's a Jedi temple there, and they're stripping kyber crystals out of it to put into the Death Star to build this big weapon. Baze has those kyber crystals in his gun. Jin's got the one around her neck. They put him in every lightsaber ever made. So that's really interesting. And it's sort of that, like, if you're close to them or too exposed to them, it's like working in a coal mine where you come out with a black lung.
Or like being around radiation. It's
Yeah.
very much a very similar kind of Manhattan Project thing going on here.
Right. So I don't know, like, again, like, that's the kind of stuff that, like, to get more of, you have to, like, dig in. And I think he'll be explored in Rebels and stuff like that. But I feel like there are a lot of Easter eggs from Star Wars Rebels in this movie that if you blinked, you missed them. They didn't really have any place. Not that they didn't have a place, but it wasn't like they demanded that you had to know the backstory. But I think with Saw, it's one of those things where when we finally do flesh out his backstory, I'll appreciate Rogue One a little bit better. But based on what we saw in this movie, I feel like there wasn't enough.
Well, so essentially, we have his character arc bisected here, right?
Yeah.
So like we've seen him in Clone Wars, where he was a rebel leader, and then we see him here, where he's this sort of paranoid extremist.
Yeah.
And what we're missing is this middle chunk to add context to this character
which
here.
you get for half a second,
Yeah.
right? When he's like younger with a shaved head, and it's in
the
trailers.
trailers, yeah.
Yeah, and you actually see it in a second in the movie. He opens up the hatch to let Jin out, and then when they meet again, she's yelling at him for not like taking better care of him when she was like a teenager or something. So you're clearly missing a big chunk there, and I don't know if that's like editing. We'll get into like what was cut from this film later.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about K2SO, which
Love
I
that
think
dude.
is a fantastic droid in a long line of quirky, funny, weird, kind of sarcastic comic relief droids in Star Wars. The idea of a reprogrammed Imperial droid is a really good idea.
Yeah.
Alan Tudyk's character like lit up the theater. Every time I was there, people were laughing and clapping.
He definitely got the biggest laughs out
Yeah.
of anybody in the.
I just really liked him. You know?
Yeah,
I mean,
think
that's I want to say
design's
that.
awesome.
Yeah, just
Like-
across the board, I don't think there was a character in Rogue One that I didn't like.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I obviously wasn't rooting for villains, but they're like Krennic is fantastic as a villain.
Yep.
K2SO, he felt to me like almost a cross between like Chewbacca and 3PO.
Yeah.
You know, like he's got this. He still kicks ass. Like we've never really seen a droid kick ass and still have a personality.
I mean, to me,
Yeah.
Like we've seen battle droids do stuff, but as far as like I mean, Grievous doesn't really count. but,
to me, he
R2
was-
shot a few bolts out here and there.
yeah, but R2's never had lines, you know.
Yeah.
Well, to me, he was based on, like, at least in part on HK-47.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah,
there's so
totally.
much of that sort of sardonic humor.
And I love that. Because
Yeah.
that's one of the first droids in Star Wars that was like, oh, you can be kind of a sarcastic ass and still be in Star Wars. There's that moment where they hand him the gun, where he's just got this awkward face. He's holding a gun backwards, and he's just like, oh, this is mine now. And he's like, oh, pew, 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 and just starts taking dudes out. His whole arc of not really wanting to be there, but wanting to be there, like it was kind of like the
Well,
way
it's
like
being there out of necessity, right?
Yeah.
He's a droid, so he has to serve. You know, like he has that line to Jin before they're shipping off. He's like, I'll stay with you. I'll stay by your side.
Yep.
And then there's a beat, and he goes, Cassian told me I had to.
Right.
You know,
but also when they tell him to stay in the car, he's kind of a dog, and he's
Yeah.
like, it's boring in there. I want
I
to go
love
hang out
that.
with
That
you
one,
guys.
that's one that kills me.
Yeah, it's awesome to see a droid just gunning down stormtroopers.
I really, really hate the part where he introduces himself, though.
When he explains his whole story.
yeah.
I'm not the kind of guy who jumps on a line as being like, that's a bad line.
Yeah.
But for him to be like, hello, I'm K2SO. I'm a reprogrammed Imperial droid. And you're like, I mean, 3PO does the same thing, but that was in 1977 before we knew what droids were immediately upon looking at them.
Now, speaking of bad lines in the movie, there was one that particularly, there were enough groans in the audience to spin a windmill. But we were sitting there being like, what is that line where Darth Vader comes out? And first of all, let's get into Darth Vader real quick. I think he was handled really well in this movie. I thought that his castle on Mustafar was really cool. The idea of him sort of living in his own prison where his wife was killed and his body was mangled, and he's in that weird bath and his friends have to watch him bathe.
So I had a question for you guys.
Yeah.
This is the first time that we've seen anything in Star Wars about him living outside the suit, right? Like
No, in
because-
Empire you have that moment where he's in that eggshell.
But he's in the suit. They're putting the helmet on him.
Yeah.
But this implies to me that there's some sort of regenerative thing that Darth Vader has to do.
I mean,
or,
it's
like,
he's in a Bacta tank.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Or some kind of vape chamber where he's getting high.
just doing
I don't know what he's
blazes?
doing. Yeah.
I think it's just like, look
just
at...
chewing cotton,
Dude,
Yeah.
you know?
like maybe if you
Getting real
if you
smoked
got
out.
maybe if you got like respiratory problems, living on like a smoky volcano planet isn't the best for you. You know?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
go to a place that has like rainforests or something, or like nice clean air. I don't know. That's just strange.
But it's kind of what I love about his whole thing is just, I don't know, and this is dark, but it's kind of like when they like find like Saddam Hussein or Bin Laden, and they're like living in this cave. I cursed. Sorry.
Yeah,
Whatever.
it's all right. We're editing it, I guess. Remember to do that.
And it's like, oh,
did a
you.
swear.
It's like I would expect better from you, but it's like because you're all powerful and rich and stuff like
I
that.
think it
But
was
you're also like
yeah.
kind of a mess.
It was more like Phantom of the Opera, Mrs. Havisham kind of thing.
Yeah,
Where it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, like you're still nursing this like tragic thing.
Right.
I will say, like, I wish that Mustafar had looked like that in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
Not like visually, because obviously special effects have come a while, but I think that they actually presented. Like they had the setting help establish the role.
Yeah. Mhm.
It wasn't just like this video game level with lava flying around.
Although,
Like, the fact that
unless-
they were like, oh, this is Ralph McQuarrie art come to life. Like
Yeah.
this is something that Lucas wanted to do since A New Hope and
Yeah.
since
But
Empire.
Here's the thing about that whole sequence is like what Brian said earlier about whether or not the movie works for the uninitiated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like you don't get any of that significance if you're not a Star Wars fan, and they don't bother to label the planet Mustafar
Yeah, I
as
was
they're
gonna-
coming in, and so most of the planets get a label throughout the course of the film, so
you
you
get a
know
lower third
where
title,
it is.
yeah.
But
That was
Mustafar
super
doesn't.
annoying.
Mustafar doesn't have one.
I know.
So unless you're like Star Wars fans like we are, you
Yeah.
might not pick up that that's the same lava planet from Revenge of the Sith.
I mean, maybe they just wanted to. I mean, if they said, Mustafar, home of Darth Vader, weird dude who lives in a fish tank right
Yeah.
now. I mean, I think the fact that they're like, oh, here's dramatic music and like
It's a pretty dramatic
it's
setting.
a hellish landscape with a
Yeah.
giant Gothic castle, like this
Yep.
brutalist architecture,
Yeah.
and it's like you kind of know that that's a villain who's going to be there.
Sure. Also, we
yeah.
never got to the line that
Yeah,
was
so his
bothering you.
line
Yeah,
is
sorry.
"Don't choke on your aspirations" after he chokes on Krennic. And I think that like
Dude, if anyone's going to be talking about aspirating, this guy's not the one to know about it.
And let's put it this way. I mean, Star Wars has already had, or always had, like some corny one-liners here and there, but I think for the most part they're kind of heartfelt and they work. Aside
I mean,
from,
even
like, the-
Vader has had some of those
Yeah.
like tongue-in-cheek sort of
Yeah,
kind of nods,
yeah.
but never so blatant as to be like wielding the Force with one hand, choking a man, and being like, "I'm choking you right now. You're choking. Hey,
was-
did you guys see that? I'm choking this dude."
Right,
Like,
and I think it's like, I mean, let's.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
now.
You get it?
Yeah.
Like,
That was
I think
stupid.
that the movie was interesting in that it threw a lot of new stuff at people and it sort of expected them to catch up, which you should if you're a Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
You should get it. Like, when I watched Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, it didn't say Tatooine, home of Jabba the Hutt, and it didn't say, like, Dagobah, home of Yoda, dying frogman. It was.
I wish it had.
I wish it had. But instead it was just like, you're here, figure it out. And this movie was just kind of like, we're going to tell you what this is, we're going to explain this, but we're not going to explain this, but we are going to explain this. And
Super weird. I'm totally okay if they lose the crawl. I think they also need to lose the lower thirds
Yeah,
though, because
yeah.
like, dude, anybody who cares is gonna look it up on their own.
yeah.
You know?
And if,
well,
if
and also
you're-
there's enough context, like especially upon seeing it a second time, that those lower thirds are completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
They tell you so many times where they're going. We're going to Jeddah.
Yeah.
We need to find this. They're harvesting this. Like it's all there, even if the dialogue in the first, I don't know, 45
Yeah.
minutes is really rapid fire.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but like a movie like I don't know, like Meet the Fockers, it's kind of movie I'll maybe watch once,
Max's
maybe,
personal favorite.
maybe
movie.
twice if I'm kind of drunk on a Saturday afternoon. Star Wars, I will watch the worst Star Wars 30 times. Like, so I don't need those lower thirds because I'm gonna, like you said, it's a
Yeah.
really good point. You're gonna keep seeing over and over. Now, Krennic, let's talk about him real quick. Ben Mendelsohn's character,
Probably my favorite.
fantastic.
Probably my favorite villain
Yeah.
in Star Wars outside of Darth Vader.
Yeah, just
I was
incredible
gonna
villain.
say that too.
Yeah.
I mean, Boba Fett's sort of a,
Right.
but yeah,
Sure,
no, like
sure.
as far as just like a basic human dude who doesn't have like a cool costume or magic goth wizard powers, he's my favorite.
I actually think he has an incredibly cool costume. Like the
No,
sort
but
of-
I mean like it's a cape. It's a
well,
cool
we-
costume. I mean he's not like
Yeah.
he's not like Boba Fett. You
So
know?
I think
Yeah.
that his contrast works so awesome, and we'll get into this. But the cinematography is amazing. This
Yeah,
movie.
really great.
I'm sure you noticed. But the idea of like when you first see him in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and he comes out and he's
Sort of that
sort
like rain slick.
yeah, with the rain slick, and he's flanked by those death troopers on each side, and it's just this wet, muddy planet, and that sort of like. There's like very deep, bassy, like violin stuff happening, like cellos and stuff, and it's just like kind of bubbling. There's something haunting and terrifying about that, and the way he kind of cracks when Galen Erso goes, "Oh, you know, my wife died," and he's like, "Oh,
I'm so sorry to hear
my
about that.
condolences."
Yeah.
Search the place. like,
Yeah.
it's
See,
great.
he's such a smartass, you know, because then she shows up not 2 minutes later,
Yeah.
and he goes, "Oh, look, it's Liara back from the
Yeah.
dead," and it's
Yeah.
like, you know, I feel like he's a little more human and a little more relatable than some of the other tertiary villains like Moff Tarkin or something
Well,
like
look
that.
at
Like,
what's his name in Force Awakens, who's with Kylo Ren, with the red hair.
Ron Weasley.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
10 points for Gryffindor.
That's right.
So we're all forgetting him, but he's
a pretty forgettable character.
He has a sort of the same thing as Krennic, where he's just kind of like, hey, pay attention to me. I did a good thing. Like, they both go to Snoke, and they're like, he screwed up. No, he screwed up. And Snoke's like, figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, take care of your crap. Krennic in this movie was kind of just like, so you think I can talk to the Emperor now? I did a good thing with my cool ball.
That's the thing.
And
Is
Vader's
he's always trying to make sure that somebody is relaying his achievements.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you're going to tell the Emperor that I did this thing real well, right?
Yeah.
Because
I mean, he's an opportunist.
I'm trying to get a couple more of these color squares.
Yeah. I've almost collected an entire pack of Halls. No, like I really loved him just because he was like just a convincing Nazi, you know?
Yeah.
Like the Empire is space Nazis, and that
Yeah.
felt like the beginning of Inglourious Bastards, where it's like, I'll have a glass of milk.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I noticed you counted weird. Gotcha. You know, like.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that one weird scene where there's like a flashback where he's like, is he getting drunk with Galen and they're just kind of hanging out? Like,
having, like,
part of the
having
first time
gas.
we've seen people getting drunk at Star Wars?
No, definitely not.
Oh,
really?
Are you
Have you ever seen the Jabba's palace scene? Never
the
been
Mos
getting drunk in
Eisley
there.
Cantina?
Yeah.
Drinking that blue milk.
That's the first time we've seen rich guys getting drunk in Star
Yeah,
Wars.
okay, I guess
that's
you're
the first
right.
time we've seen businessmen with scotch.
Like
They're
just a
probably having,
straight up
like, a nice-
tumbler.
Yeah, no, they're having like
Because I think the way it
fancy
even
drinks.
looked like kind of hazy was interesting. Like
Yeah.
they did some weird camera
I
tricks
like
there.
that because that was like I want to see more of that. I want to see more just kind of day in the life. And I think one of my biggest complaints about both Force Awakens and Rogue One is that they are rushing to get through the movie.
Yeah.
Like they are rushing to keep up the energy. And they need to take a breather, and like some of the best moments in Star Wars are when there's kind of like a pause, you know,
Yeah.
kind of a dull moment. But I mean, that said, like Rogue One did have some really cool stuff in the background, like the Krennic part where he's showing up, and you're just like, oh, this is where they live. Like,
Yep.
I mean, they burned through that farmhouse sequence like way faster than A New Hope did, but you still got to see some blue milk and some stuffed animals.
Oh boy, did you see that blue milk.
Yeah.
They
Now,
did a weird zoom on that blue milk.
Obviously, the villains are really cool. The Darth Vader scene at the end of the movie is one of the best things they've ever done in Star Wars, I think. It's just pure energy, and it's just so much fun to watch. I've seen it like twice now, and every single time he throws the guy in the air, keeps him up there, and saws him in half. Like, he didn't need to. It's just joy.
I was
the
on
thing
the edge
about-
of my seat for
yeah,
that. That
The
was
thing
so
about
good.
that sequence is Darth Vader, I feel like in the fiction of Star Wars and the lore, has always been portrayed as this like terrifying blight, this like
Yeah.
menace who wields the Force so strongly and can just destroy.
Yeah.
Like sort of like you remember the opening level in The Force Unleashed where you play as Darth Vader.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
the power that he wields is so insane.
Yeah.
And I feel like we hadn't seen that on film until this movie. And that sequence, I was talking to our very own Damon Hatfield about it, and Damon said that it felt like, that feels like something out of a horror movie.
Yeah.
It's dark, and then you
Yeah.
see him only illuminated in red by his lightsaber. And he's cutting through these people, and there's a guy like slamming his fists on the door, screaming like, "Get us out of here!"
Yeah.
And like
and he stabs
impales
through
him.
his
Yeah.
body, and you see the lightsaber come out the door and then cut the door open. That is straight up horror.
Yeah.
Like, you're totally right.
But in the most awesome
No,
way.
it was so good.
Yeah.
Patton Oswalt tweeted out that he was like, "This is how you do Vader. This is how he should be like the shark in Jaws or
Yeah.
Jason Voorhees. He's
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
element, or the
exactly.
Joker in the Dark Knight or whatever." And that is like completely hitting the nail on the head. Prequels for what they do right, like showing this like badass villain who has been like just a nightmarish, just epic figure. Recasting him as the boy from Jingle All the Way may be kind of the wrong way to go about it. But
Yeah.
I'm glad we finally got to see this, and it wasn't like this. No, it was him kicking ass. It was Vader being Vader.
Yeah.
like we haven't seen like. I feel like I haven't seen Vader doing anything close to that since
ever.
Empire, maybe.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's some obvious like lightsabering happening in
Yeah.
Empire and Jedi, but nothing like this. And I
Nothing
think
to
that,
that extent,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that the shot of him at the back of that ship where he turns his lightsaber off and sheathes it, and you see his cape kind of blowing in space wind.
Yeah. What is this? Space Wind? What's up with that?
It was probably my favorite shot of the whole movie.
Yeah.
And also, I feel like that should have been the point where the film ended. I know we'll probably get to this later, but like I
Yes,
feel like
totally,
if credits would have rolled
totally.
there, it would have been such a stronger ending.
So
because that whole sequence, like while I love it, definitely retcons the intro to A New Hope.
It does.
Because
Yeah.
not only do you see him go on this Sith rampage in this scene, only to show up on that ship and be like, all right, you guys go find that disc. I'm just too sleepy from messing those dudes up. Like,
yeah, and it's nuts. It's actually the closest we've come to see anything like that from his character is in episode 3 when he kills all those kids in the library and he kills all of those sand troopers.
Yeah.
You know, he just goes
In
just
episode
ham on
2,
those
yeah.
guys.
I like that.
I wanted to talk about Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus because I think they're really cool characters. I think they're sort of like either dating or just adorable best friends.
Oh, they're doing kisses?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ooh.
like their whole story is very weird because they're kind of just like dudes hanging out on Jeddah, which is the like sort of abandoned Jedi planet that's now overrun by the Empire. They're hanging out. They're one of them is a lot more connected to the Force. Baze kind of says like that used to be my jam, but not so much anymore. Chirrut seems like a really nice guy that just kind of gets it. He's blind, but he can still kick some ass. And then they get taken on this adventure, as what always happens in Star Wars, sort of willingly / unwillingly. And they end up watching their planet get exploded. And then they're just kind of like, we're on this suicide mission now. And I think watching those two guys interact really, really awesome.
Yeah, their on-screen chemistry was really great. Like regardless of what their backstory is, supposedly after.
Mind your business.
Yeah.
Who cares?
But one of the things that really bothered me about them, and I think this sort of sums up like one of my biggest issues, was the way that their backstory was handled, right? Because there's this passing line that Chirrut says
That's
about,
the other bad. That's the
about-
other really bad line.
He says, what's his name? Baze
Malbus.
Yeah, Baze Malbus was the most dedicated of all of us, and that's it. Like
the most
that's
dedicated guardian of us all, or
Yeah.
something, and you're like,
Yeah.
what? Of
And
what
they-
is of what? What did he guard? The
well,
mall? The temple?
they belong to this. They belong to this sect of.
Yeah, the
not-
Guardians of the Wills
The
or
Guardians of
whatever.
the Will. That they're not Force users, but they guard the temples
Yeah.
that are sacred to the Jedi. And
they're force or at least
force sensitive.
At least
for
Chirrut
sure.
is force
Yeah.
sensitive, right?
But that line, like those characters, there's so much more to those two characters and that all those Guardians that is just completely glazed over in 7 words.
But we live in a universe now where a single sentence can become a movie down the line.
That's
so
true, too.
who knows?
Well, and like,
Maybe
I
we
guess
get
it
the
goes
Baze
back.
and Chirrut buddy cop
I
film
guess it
now.
goes back to the
Yeah.
grand tradition of Star Wars where, you know, like one of the things that I loved about Star Wars as a kid was when I realized that each and every one of those weirdo aliens in the cantina scene had a backstory that was interesting and worth looking up.
Totally.
And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it's a double-edged sword. Like, it could be the fact that they glossed over it, but then also maybe you're right. Maybe we do find out more of the Guardians later. So
Now, we've talked about a lot of characters in this movie. I did want to touch really quickly on probably the most interesting one I've ever seen in the history of Star Wars, which is Boogaloo, the psychic octopus that was dropped in this film to tickle the guy from HBO's The Night Of.
Was that a
Yeah,
was that
yeah,
a character?
What? Yeah,
or-
I don't know what that was. So I read. I read the art book.
Deceptions!
Boogly! I read the art book, and there's a lot of really cool sketches of him, just like there are of Saw Gerrera. Quick reading note here: 2 books you should check out. One of them is The Art of the Force Awakens, which is fantastic. Max and I have been buying these art of books for years. Not crazy about the Force, or not the Force Awakens one.
Yeah.
The Art of
Art of
Rogue
Rogue
One
One.
is actually a
Yeah.
legitimately awesome book. Also, there's Pablo Hidalgo's Visual Dictionary, which also launched last week. A lot more sort of like big pictures, cool captions and text about all the tangible prop goods made.
That's
in the
not
movie.
about the making of. That's about what it is canonically in the universe. You can find out like characters like Moroff, the Gigantonian or whatever. I call him the piss-footed Yeti. I want
got pee-pee right on his feet. It's terrible.
Boogaloo, or Boogaloo, whatever his name
Yeah.
is, Boogali. They tried out 2 different things. He was originally supposed to be an insect, and they landed on octopus because he could touch with his weird tendrils. He's thrown in this movie for half a second. It's sort of the idea of showing like Saw as like this weird guy that has a pet and lives in the desert, sort of like Jabba did with the Rancor. But the Rancor kills a guy and like makes another man cry, but nothing really happens here.
I think it's supposed to represent like him being an extremist, right?
Yeah.
Like he's willing to harbor this weird octopus man and use him to gain information from whoever. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's supposed to represent him as an outlier.
So
and
is Boogaloo like rebel waterboarding?
yeah, well the thing about it is
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
No, this
but
is
it's
this
like,
is so far we in the movies we've only seen the Empire torturing.
right.
Yeah.
But this is like kind of a slightly weirder, more erotic version that the
Also, I feel like we talked about this coming out of the theater, but I feel like one of the things that the new Star Wars films are doing that I'm not super stoked on is that they're horseshoeing these weirdo aliens because we got the Rathtars in The Force Awakens to
Yeah.
remind people like
You mean shoehorning?
Horseshoeing.
Horseshoeing? Yeah, I do mean shoehorning.
Going out in the backyard, horseshoeing them in there, yeah.
Putting the big boots right on those horses, letting them know what's what. But no, they're
Tauntaun footing.
yeah, they're just shoehorning these weirdo aliens in there to show like, hey, don't forget, we're still in space. There's still a lot of
I'm
aliens.
also just, dude, like, especially after the Rathtars, at almost the same kind of point in the movie,
Yeah.
it's just like, I like Star Wars animals, but like, use your imagination. Like, the tentacle monster is kind of like, an octopus is cool, but like, why wasn't it an insect? I would have been really excited to see that.
Well, it's like now they're basically like fast Sarlacc pits and slow fat Sarlacc pits.
I don't know. Get weird with it.
Yeah, and Max, you and I were talking about the fact that, like, first of all, we love how dense this film is. And we can talk about the worlds of this movie right now, which I think are incredible. They created some really special new places for this film that are kind of unlike anything we've seen. Now, we've seen like a forest. Now we've got a jungle. We've seen sand planets, but this one's totally different.
Yeah,
right?
we saw like a stormy beach sequence in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
We saw like a weird floral sequence where Aayla Secura gets capped or whatever.
Yeah.
But Scarif is the first time that it's been like tropical party war zone.
Yeah.
You're like, all right.
I know there wasn't time for it, but I would have loved like some lizards or some weird animals on that planet. Like there are really none, just a bunch of men. I don't know if like maybe they just hang out and they just target animals all day, and that's why they're dead.
I think with Rogue One specifically, they were trying to make a Star Wars war movie.
Yeah.
And one of the last times we got like a really big war sequence, it was like the big boomers rolling around in Episode 1. Like there have only been so many of these so far, so to have like a ground war where that's happening, and to have like a Kadu in the background would probably give some people some, Phantom Menace PTSD or whatever.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That being said, I do appreciate how much the rest of this movie was just really dense. You would visit the worlds and you would start looking around. Like Jeddah specifically, I would look over and I was like, "Is that a Twi'lek? Is that
Jeddah,
Baba and Evazan are there?" Like,
Jeddah rules so much because it is this movie's equivalent to Maz Kanata's fort or Maz Kanata's palace or the cantina from the first movie, where it's just jam packed with this awesome background scenes and like so many brand new aliens and like weird new species that we've never seen before, like those dudes from Journey.
Yeah, we pointed that on the show a while back. Those guys with the red hats.
Yeah, but then also like you said, like there's a Twi'lek back there, and we saw a probe droid floating through.
Yeah, the probe droid's awesome.
My kind of like one sentence verdict for this versus Force Awakens would be: Force Awakens is a better movie to watch. This is a better movie to look at. Like so much of Star Wars to me that I like to scrub through is like those dense, jam-packed things. And going back and watching Force Awakens again, there are parts where I'm just like, those are just like lazy sand people. Like the Unkar's goons who beat up Rey, like they're just like dudes who are like, they're just like kind of budget mummies, and they come out and they're just like those could have been like weird ass aliens, but they weren't. They were just like dudes with wraps on.
Budget Mummies is actually the name of my street punk band.
But yeah, like I mean, the sequences on Jeddah. There's that weird hourglass-shaped asteroid trading outpost thing that I forget the name of because even though it had a lower third. But yeah, that had like just stuff like weird hats, people wearing trash cans on their heads. Like that's Star Wars to me, being like, why is that guy holding an ice cream maker? Like what's up with that guy's hat?
There's also droids that we saw in the original trilogy.
Yep.
Yeah. I know we saw that sort of bug-eyed big head droid. You know what I'm talking about.
A cool looking guy.
But there's one specific shot on Jeddah that like sold the film for me, and that's one of the first shots where it starts. You're looking up at the Star Destroyer in the sky, and it pans down through this alley, and there's all these like prayer flags and lights strung across the alley, and then it's just this crowded street. It like looks like Morocco or something, except it's all these alien creatures, and then right there in the middle is Jen and Cassian, and their mid-convo, and it just felt like a real place to me. It felt like something tangible.
I mean, even from the moment you meet Jyn as an adult character and she's in that like jail ship car thing, and there's that like sleeping squid boy next to her, you're like, Star Wars is weird, and I love it for that. You know, like at any given moment, if you're looking around at a bar in a place where a bunch of people live, a major city, you're going to see people from all over the universe, all walks of life, and Star Wars is really great at encapsulating that.
Yeah,
I'm sort of having a character look up and being like, oh, there's a piss mummy, and like a dog man, and like. There's that scene in the cantina in A New Hope where there's just like a snake talking to a werewolf, and you're like, are they dating? What's going on?
I just want more of that. I want them to, like, again, with the fact that Disney feels like they're kind of almost rushing through this. Yeah. I mean, we've seen it where we get action figures for The Force Awakens of aliens that don't make the final cut of the movie because they were trying to hit a certain running time, and it's like, dude, we are in a post Lord of the Rings society. People will watch a 4-hour cut of this. Like, show me a shot of Constable Zuvio. Show me Sarko Plank.
Yeah,
like,
stop cutting stuff from the
yeah,
films.
I mean, if you're gonna cut stuff from the films, cut off Unkar Plutt's arm, okay?
Yeah.
Like, let me see some weird alien stuff.
That being said, I mean, so we liked Mustafar. We liked Yavin. Is like we've seen it a bunch of times. It's familiar at this point.
I like your note here. Yavin 4 looks like Yavin.
Yeah, it's the same old Yavin. I mean, we get that shot of that guy with the bucket hat
in the tower.
Yeah, he's always just like, oh, the
So
ships again.
the making of that
ships.
sequence in the original A New Hope was basically an excuse for ILM dudes to go down to Mexico and take a vacation.
Oh, really?
awesome.
Yeah, they all like flew down and they had like this basically fireman's pole with a garbage can on top of it, and one of them was like, I'm gonna die, and they were like, it's cool, just get this shot and go to the bar.
Yeah, and Scarif obviously very gorgeous. Seeing the AT-ATs coming through the brush for the very first time, crushing stuff. The idea of like you see in some Vietnam movies and stuff like that. The idea of war destroying this beautiful tropical place is interesting. Edu, on the other hand, not really great to look at.
yeah.
Just kind of dark and
and-
raining. Like
yeah.
if you look at like the way they handle Sullust in Battlefront, I think that's a way to do a sort of like rocky, steamy, gross planet and still make it sort of pop and visually interesting. And this one's just kind of like wet rocks.
Well, and the
guess
thing that annoyed me
yeah.
about that is like that's where the Empire's engineers live.
Yeah.
That's where they are designing the Empire's weaponry and building the Death Star. But all we see is this one little alcove in the rain. And
Well, yeah, I think
I would have loved to
think-
see their big research facility.
Yeah,
or
I think the
something.
reasoning there is that they needed to have the U-wing crash, as I will demonstrate right here. So it's coming
Dramatic
down and they
reenactment.
crash and like,
driving along.
I can't stop. Anyway, sorry.
Tommy
I just want
boy.
to play with that. But yeah, no, like the fact that they crashed the ship and then they managed to sneak up nonetheless, you know?
Yeah.
I think they were like, let's have like a rocky, rainy place, and then it's an excuse to have X-Wings at night, which was kind of cool. I didn't know they had headlights on them. That's
I will
neat.
say, speaking of some ships in the movie, the U-wing really grew on me. When I first saw it, I was just like, this doesn't feel like it makes sense. But it was really awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really cool.
That weird sea turtle that they fly around,
You mean the Rogue One?
the Rogue One, it's
Rogue
just a
One.
great looking ship. It's so funny. It's got that orange belly. That whole scene
Well,
where
it's
they...
that thing right there. Pull
Yeah,
that
yeah.
out.
basically, yeah.
Same as this guy, basically.
No, pull it out. It's a cargo container. It's like a storage thing. How did you? It's supposed to come all the way out. I don't know what you did to it.
We're doing it. It's good. Everything's okay. Everybody
Demonstrate to the people what the cargo containers
it's
look like.
Okay, it's all right.
It's the orange. It's been a long year.
I
I
like-
don't want to pull the belly out. What else did we like? The Ghost from Rebels was in this. It's like a couple little cameos. You have here the Hammerhead Corvette.
Yeah, so that's a funny thing. That
That's
ship
from
they
Rebels,
used to,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. That ship they used to shove the Star Destroyers into each other.
Yeah.
I thought that was like, I mean, it was complete nonsense physics, but also like
Yeah.
really fun.
That was great. I said to you guys after we saw the movie, it was like watching a fork push a pizza slice into another pizza slice.
Yeah.
Like watching pizzas collide in the air and crash. Like, I don't know when they decided to add that big space battle at the end of the movie, but I'm so glad they did because it was so
Yeah.
much
It's
fun.
so funny. Like, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty
Really?
sure
You
that
sure?
in space, yeah, I'm pretty sure that in space, like, because everything is weightless, regardless of how big those ships are,
Yeah.
even if they manage to knock into each other, it would just be like this, dunk.
Yeah.
And then, so that being
Well,
said,
you see, they
I thought it
shot
was-
one of them with ion torpedoes,
Right.
so they gave it a.
I
they-
did love
they
that
doxed
whole
it.
sequence of shearing the top off of the second
Yeah.
Star Destroyer and knocking them into
was
the.
so cool
No, it was a
Awesome.
cool. It was a
Awesome.
fun-
Well, because I feel like we always watch the Star Destroyers get
yeah.
their weird testicles knocked off. Like, that's every single time they like knock off those Christmas ornaments.
That's how you defeat most Star Destroyers.
That's
you
how
gotta
you
give
get
them a
'em.
good neuter.
Like, did you see that scene?
them
I
right
know
in the
you did,
junk.
because
Yeah.
did you guys when you watch this movie again? Really focus on that scene when that one Star Destroyer hits the other one. All the men inside that ship. I don't think there's a worse way to die.
No.
Oh, no.
Like, that is a
Also-
really bad way to die.
Also, do you think that if you are an Imperial and you get assigned to a Star Destroyer, that you just fear for your life all the time because
yeah.
those things are getting messed up constantly?
Constantly.
Well,
There's
no,
like ships
I mean,
flying into them.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. This is the important thing about this movie is this is like the first time that it's war.
Yeah.
This is the first time that it's not just like weird little kind of guerrilla tactics and like, oh, we're gonna fight. Like, A New Hope starts out, and I mean, Tarkin is like, the last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away. We shut down the Senate. Like, that's them being like, okay, they took their first attack. Like, this is really like, this is the first time that rebels come out and they're like, all right, let's go for this. Like, they didn't expect, like when they're like, oh yeah, Scarif, like they don't expect us at all. No one's seen this coming because this is the first stone being thrown.
Right.
Like, this is that first attack, and that's what's really exciting about it. But yeah, like that being said, like, I mean, it's that whole aerial battle, that whole space battle was, it felt like a combination of the beginning of Revenge of the Sith and the end of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Yes.
In terms of you've got Mon Calamari and you've got Rebel cruisers around and you've got these like, Star Destroyers crashing into each other, but you've got like modern CG and cinematography. And I don't know, like that's kind of what the tone of this whole movie was, that this isn't answering a question that nobody asked. It's kind of attaching these two.
Yeah.
And as far as vehicles, they also had a turbo tank.
Yeah.
Like one of those big wheelie boys that the clones drive around
which
in.
look cool as hell in this movie.
Yeah, because they were using it as like prisoner transport, which is exactly what the military would be doing.
This is I feel like Force Awakens kind of hid from the prequels, but this movie kind of addressed them a few times, which is pretty cool to see. It was like,
well, I mean, it makes way more sense, right?
Yeah.
Like they're butting right up against the prequels,
Yeah.
or shortly thereafter.
right.
I mean, it's a cross dissolve. Like they're being like, oh, and I mean, for the people who love the prequels and stuck around for Clone Wars and Rebels, like they're getting fan service there that we were getting like we got the Outrider flying by in the special editions. It's like weird stuff that we'd heard about. So now it's like that's happening for kind of a younger generation, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah.
Now it's also
Ghost from Rebels in there
Yeah,
a couple of
totally.
times.
Absolutely. And I hope we get stuff like that for years to come because it's really, really cool. That being said, one thing I kind of hope they avoid from here on out, or at least until a very long time until it's perfect, is CG characters. Now, CG characters as aliens and monsters and robots are one thing, but we did not talk about the fact that Grand Moff Tarkin returns in this movie with probably a little bit less screen time than he had in the only movies that he's really known for, which is A New Hope, and that Princess Leia is at the end of this film, but it's not Carrie Fisher because she's very old now, and it's not Peter, who played Grand Moff Tarkin. No one remembers
Peter
it.
Cushing.
Peter Cushing. Because he passed away. So instead, Disney and Lucas opted to go with CG characters here, which I think can work in the right ways. And I feel like in this one, they made them, they got very proud of them, and they really pushed them up front.
So my whole thing
Yeah.
was like walking out of Rogue One opening night. All I could think about was those CG characters.
Yeah.
Like to me, and it was assuaged in my second viewing, but like after that initial viewing, I was like, man, those characters really ruined that for me.
Yeah.
And they didn't in the long run.
No.
But at first, like I just couldn't figure out what fan base was just so adamant about having Grand Moff Tarkin in this film that they needed to include him as such a key character.
So I think,
know. They keep trying to make Tarkin happen.
Yeah, and then
know,
also, why, if that was the case, like, why not have him on a screen?
you said that when we walked out of the opening screening on Friday night, and you were kind of like, why didn't he just like Skype in? And I was
Yeah.
like, that's the best way of putting
have
it.
him
like,
on a screen, or have any other high-ranking Imperial in that role.
yeah, like
and
less
then
is- less
and
is
then
more.
at the very end of that movie, say this operation is now under Moff Tarkin's jurisdiction.
And I want to get
Like,
something out of the way real quick. The CG behind Tarkin and Leia is some of the most impressive CG we've ever seen
Yeah,
for
but it's
any
still
human
not
character.
good enough.
But
Yeah.
it's still the tiniest bit off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's not a perfect human, it's one thing. But when they're interacting with other humans,
Yeah.
you start seeing the deadness in their eyes.
Well,
their lip hangs for half
So
a frame.
one of the most amazing things about the original Star Wars trilogy is what Industrial Light and Magic was doing on a budget.
Yeah.
And the stuff that some of the coolest and most creative ways around things. Same with like Tim Burton's movies. It's just when you don't have a budget and you've got people trying to tell you you can't do something. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, and they did that. And then part of the reason the prequels were so CG heavy was Lucas was like, I mean, they were just like, yeah, go nuts. These are going to be the highest grossing movies ever. Go for it. Have
Yeah.
fun. In this case, it's like Disney has no shortage of money, and they know that Star Wars is going to do well. And I mean, I respect that they're trying new things, but I feel like the fact that they do have kind of carte blanche to push like a new CG technology is like that part's like that part's weird.
It's weird.
And it's like if they were limited on how many shots they could have that, I feel like they would have taken more creative routes, like having him Skype in, or maybe just have him behind a desk and you see him for a second and he spins around. The wide shots of him are fantastic, but when you get right up in there, you're like, his lip is kind of odd.
The shot of him, you see like sort of the window and the reflection.
That's
on
like
him.
one of the first times you see him.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I mean-
and I think even with Leia, Leia is such a weird way to end that film because like there's videos of that on YouTube already. It just looks weird, and I've watched it like 10 times now to be like, am I crazy? Am I just being a hater? I watch it, it just looks weird, and I think the way they could have done that if they had to, and if they absolutely felt they had to end the story with Leia, is to pull back the camera, do it from 20 feet away, do it in the same way you see that iconic shot of her putting
the
gem
drive into R2.
into R2D2.
Yeah.
Like, pull the camera back. They had her look right at the camera and say that line, and then the credits roll, and you're like, we just saw Darth Vader kick ass. We saw some of the best space battles ever. We saw some of the best trooper ground battles. We saw this heart-wrenching just end to some really cool characters. And it's capped off
undercut,
with this moment of like this, it's almost like a CG puppet comes in. And it just, we're complaining about it right now in December of 2016. I don't know what this conversation is going to be like in 5 years when we revisit this film.
I feel like this is
it's not. I can't imagine that it will age terribly.
I feel like it's kind of the midichlorians of this movie, and that we're just going to not talk about it.
Yeah.
Like we're just going to try to remember the positive parts. But yeah, I mean, I think it could have been done, like just more tactfully. Like I like the idea of it. It's just the execution is like we're talking about it. You know, it's a thing.
It's close. It's just not there yet.
Like I love the line like hope. Like that was so good.
Yes,
that was
it was great.
But I will say that the backlash on these CG characters has been like so outspoken. I don't think I've read a single review of Rogue One that hasn't mentioned it.
Yeah.
I don't think that we're going to see this again until it 100% works.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that they're going to allow that to happen in subsequent films.
So what I wanted to talk about with you guys is like, do you think this will open up the doors? I mean, you're saying that they're going to shut this down. They won't be doing stuff like this for a while. But what if they do? I mean, does this open up the doors for them to be like, we're making a Han Solo movie that takes place between A New Hope and Empire, starring a CG Han Solo?
I hope not.
Like, I mean, what are the rules on this now? Because to me, it was sort of like, there was a couple years ago, this stuff first started happening, there was this Frank Sinatra commercial where
I remember this.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
There was a major backlash against this because he had been deceased for a while, and they were like, you shouldn't be doing this to him. You know, we've also seen the same with like Muhammad Ali, who was like very sick at the time of the commercial. We've seen it with like the Tupac hologram.
Yep.
As like a rap fan, it's weird to like be like, ODB is playing Coachella. I'm like, no, he's not. That's a ghost. Do we think that a Force Ghost? Totally. And like, do we think there's a chance that this is going to start sort of like creeping its way in? I mean, they can now tell a story that takes place between a prequel and the original trilogy. What's stopping them from being like, we're going to put a story in between A New Hope and Empire, where Han Solo's just like hanging out with Chewbacca?
A lot of that stuff is covered in the comics.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of the stuff that's happening in the comics right now is happening between specifically A New Hope and Empire.
Sure.
So whether they would use that as source material to make a full-length film, like I don't really know. I would hope that wouldn't be the case. Like my hope is that they, like we had talked about earlier, is that they start moving outward, right? Like we have this first Star Wars story that's very relatable to Star Wars fans. You know the context, like you know the core plot of it before you even go into it. And now, next we're gonna get the Han Solo films and the Boba Fett Solo films. But then beyond that, it's anybody's guess. And like I would love to see them do more movies about smaller characters, or like a bounty hunter movie that's not about Boba Fett.
Well, I think it'd be really cool to see, like, you know, Shadows of the Empire takes place, but Rogue One is the first time it's been between two movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Shadows of the Empire takes place. That was everything but the movie. That was the game, the book, the comics, the toys, and that was kind of Lucas like testing the waters for what the prequels would be.
Right.
But it's like, what happened to Han Solo when he was in Carbonite? How did they wind up getting tangled up with Jabba? Like, what's the story there?
They got Dash Rendar.
Yeah, I
to be
think
Han Solo.
you totally could do a Shadows of the Empire movie. Obviously, some things would get shuffled around. But
is that sacrilegious?
But make it kind of in the same way that Rogue One did.
Yeah.
But maybe a little bit lighter on the CG.
Right.
I mean, if
do
you
you think it's weird to start putting movies in the middle? The original trilogy is Sacred Cow, and to just be like, there's a movie in between 2 and 3. Or
what if you call the Shadows of the Empire a Star Wars story?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Don't make it episode 4.5.
Well, you couldn't call it that, but
Or
yeah,
5.
you're right. You're right.
I think the thing is, like, regardless of what story you slap the Star Wars moniker on, people will go see it.
Of course,
you know. And like that was your thing about you talking. One of your fears about this movie was that people wouldn't go see it because they were confused as to what it was. And I remember you telling me about having to tell your parents, well, it doesn't take place after this, and there's no BB-8. It's actually takes place before the first movie. And
yeah, I was at a Thanksgiving party. There was like 30 people my age, and they were just like, "So what's up with the new Star Wars? Is it like is J.J. Abrams doing it?" And I was like, "Well, first of all, that's a weird first. That was your takeaway, was J.J. Abrams?" And they were like, "Is the ball back?" And I'm like, "Well, no. I mean, there's like a new ball, but he's really tall." And
but yeah, but ultimately, like this movie has had a tremendous opening weekend.
Yes. Yeah.
So. That's it. Like that's the rule, or that's the lesson that Disney has taken away. Is like, well, okay, we can make any Star Wars film.
Sure. I mean, we'll see what the sort of long tail on this movie looks like.
I hope we get an extended cut.
Me too. Oh God.
So we have
let's
a few minutes left in the show.
that, yeah.
We have a few minutes left in the show. I think it's really important to talk about the fact that We saw a bunch of trailers and read a bunch of synopsis and saw a bunch of stills for a bunch of stuff that never happened in this movie. Almost every trailer that has been revealed and released for this movie so far contained footage, scenes, iconic moments, quotes that became t-shirts of things that are 100% not in the theatrical cut of Rogue One. Let's start with that shot of Jyn running across that plank as a TIE fighter comes towards her.
Yeah.
Gorgeous, iconic, threatening, terrifying. You go, I gotta see that movie to see how she gets out of it. Don't worry about it. She just does. Doesn't happen.
IGN put up a video today, actually, that is a cut of all the stuff that was in the trailers that didn't make it to the final movie. And the one that got me thinking the most is there's a scene from, I think it was the first full-length trailer of Jyn and Cassian running across the beach. And you see her holding the drive with the information.
Yeah.
Right, which is really
leads,
fascinating.
Like, that's crazy to me because that means that she didn't, all of the business about having to transmit it didn't happen in one cut. Like, what did she just keep a hard copy?
Oh, no, or there's separate buildings. So my theory with that is that they went up to the top of the building, K2SO dies in that gunfire blast, they play the claw machine game to get the NES cartridge out. I'm being reductive. They get the Death Star stuff, they run downstairs, they realize that they can't transmit from there, but there's a tower that they can see that has a radar on it. They go down, run across the beach, that's where they have that big-ass battle with the
AT-ATs.
Yeah, that are shooting them down. Another major scene that was not in there, and they get it to somewhere, they transmit, and then they all get exploded and die by the Death Star. Apparently, Gareth Edwards had pitched from the jump that they wanted to do all the characters dying at the end, and he was like, they're not going to like this because it's Disney, and apparently people were mostly on board with it, but I think they kicked around the idea of maybe a backup plan, but never really had to explore it because everyone was kind of like, no, go for it, that's awesome. But there was that's so interesting to think about, like, where this movie ended was up here, and they actually got those plans down here, brought them across the beach, and went to Question Mark, and we never got to see that stuff. You know?
Yeah, I mean,
it's also like the promise of some of the characters that were going to be featured more heavily. Like, one of the first things that we saw from Rogue One was that Entertainment Weekly spread that were like, here are the characters that you need to know going into Rogue One, and your buddy, the Pissfoot Yeti, was on there.
Moroff.
Those two little.
I want more off him.
Those two little turd bears. That, you know, like they
the turd. Which turd bears?
Those little bear men with the guns.
Oh, Pow and Bistan?
Oh yeah, Pow and Bistan, and then of course there's the Adrio Two Tubes and his good pal Benny Hanna.
Which are those guys are in the movie?
Yeah, but
like
they just have like a few. At least they got lines. I don't know. It's really cool to see more diversity in terms of human actors, but I'm still bummed that we're not getting as much weird aliens showing up in the background.
Yeah. Especially now that there's like the budget for it.
When this was pitched as sort of this like ensemble monster alien person Suicide Squad death mission to steal the plans, I did want like not just like 15 grisly looking dudes and a girl. I wanted more aliens and more everything. And I think they're getting there. You're totally right in that they're getting there with the diversity of the human cast. But it's Star Wars. I want a Rodian on their squad. Like when I play Battlefront and I've got like a Celestin, a Rodian, and a Twi'lek all running around with me, like taking down like Krennic or something like that, or you know Han Solo runs out and he's fighting like IG-88 or whatever the hell. Like he's not in it.
You made that up.
Yeah, I made that up. I didn't just unlock a character for you. That stuff's really cool. And like if the video games are doing it, video games have actually been doing it for years. If you look like KOTOR and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I want more of that in the movies. But do you think we're going to get an extended cut of this movie that has a bunch of stuff that we've never seen?
I would assume so. And I really hope that they don't go the route of Force Awakens and they offer one definitive director's cut version of it and not like, hey, if you want extra scenes, buy it from this outlet, and if you want this thing, then buy it from this. I hope that there's one edition of whatever Blu-ray comes out.
I'm super down with like the Lord of the Rings approach to Star Wars movies, and if they got like, you know, if they want to, kick Gareth Edwards a few extra bucks and have him sit in the editing room for a couple hours and throw in some extra footage of, a Bistan and Moroff, then that'd be a good time.
So I'm not crazy about like the Hobbit films, but the director's commentaries for those films and the director's cuts are brutally honest in that they tell you exactly where those movies went wrong or right or weird, like how things changed. And this is obviously a movie we've known about the reshoots and the recuts and stuff like that, and we've known about like things that kind of came and went in terms of like story beats, but I think it's a matter of like, will Disney be completely tight-lipped about this? I mean, they have Star Wars, they're giving us all these awesome movies, but also they're pretty guarded. They have a literal, not literal vault where they keep things. I really hope we do get something that is more than just like when I bought The Force Awakens on Amazon Prime. The digital file they gave me of that movie showed the movie, then it ended, then there was a making of, and then there was a bunch of deleted scenes.
All on one file.
All on one file,
Yeah.
like in a row. And I'm like, that's weird. It's just like a 3-hour thing, a 3.5-hour thing.
Yeah.
I want different cuts. I'll buy them. You know?
like Star Wars has always been like really good about giving insight on how they did stuff, like the model making and behind the scenes stuff, because it is industrial grade light and magic. Like that's what it is. And I hope that they kind of keep supporting that with the new movies, in spite of the fact that it might be, you know, weird fritzy stuff behind the scenes.
So, final thoughts on Star Wars Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
I'm totally happy with it. I'm totally fine with it. It's not my new favorite Star Wars movie, but I mean I saw it 3 times in 72 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's great to watch. It's better to look at.
Yep.
And I have a ton of hope for what Disney's doing moving forward. So you know.
Yeah. Same. I mean, I said it at the top of this episode. I think it's good, not great, but I think it's about as best a jumping off point as we could possibly have for more Star Wars standalone stories.
Yeah.
So
I
give it 1.5 thumbs up. It looks like this.
out of 2 thumbs up.
See
right?
a doctor.
I think that we've had really good and really great Star Wars movies for so long, and then we had a couple of ones that were like not so good, borderline bad. And this is the first one that's just like.
It's no borderline. They were not good movies.
Well, I think no. Hold on. I think the prequels had some good stuff in them.
Sure.
I think on like. I
didn't mean to distract you. Go ahead.
No. I think on like a very fundamental movie level, yes, you are correct. But you know, they're about like aliens and animals fighting dudes in costumes and stuff like that. So you get what you can get. But I think this is the first movie that's just like a pretty good Star Wars, and we're not used to that because we've had great and we've had not so great, and this is like a pretty good. And if we can get pretty good Star Wars for a long time, I'm really happy about that.
If a pretty good Star Wars has a Metacritic of 8.4,
Yeah.
like I'm 100% fine with that.
Yeah, like
give me an 84 movie any day.
A pretty good Star Wars movie to me is still better than 95% of the other movies out there because it's Star Wars, and I always love Star
Yeah,
Wars.
and it's got those piss-footed Yetis running around. So
Those bad boys.
yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Coming up next, I don't think we're doing anything. Are we doing anything? We're probably
Nah.
not doing anything.
think
This
so.
is it. This is us for the year at IGN. Thank you so much for supporting this show all year long. I'm Brian Altano. This is Zach Ryan, and that's Max Scoville. Up at Noon has been just a wonderful sense of joy and stupidity for all of us here at IGN all year long. We get to put our toys in the desk. We got this new set. It's awesome. So thank you to Gillette, the best a man can get, for powering the show this month, and to all our sponsors next year. We're looking for you. Hi.
Yeah.
And remember, go see Star Wars as many times as you can over the Christmas break. And may the Force be with you.
Shout out to Zach for producing the show.
And Zach,
I've had a really great run with you guys. It's been a lot of
his
fun.
final episode, he's going on to do great things elsewhere in the building.
Yeah.
We got you this as a going away present.
Thank you.
You have to
It's
put that
a
back
robot
in.
that's never been in a film.
Yeah. Don't put it in
Star
this
War.